you can see here, we have 140 participants all around Europe. And here is night, but Matias Zarlenga comes from far away, from Buenos Aires. So I suppose there it's still early, Matias, right?
Yes, it's early. It's 2 o'clock.
Great. And as we are going, we were talking a lot about inclusion this year, but as most of you know, next year I will also be dealt with the cultural heritage, and we are the creative classroom group. I thought that talking about these new frameworks and narratives and policies of cultural creativity with Matias Zarlenka would be really interesting. And because we are already a bit, late, I just want to give the floor to Matias to introduce you the topic. And thank you for accepting my invitation, Matias.
Okay. First of all, I would like to give the thanks, Irene, for the invitation to participate in the expert talks. And I also thanks to all of you for participating in this class. I hope this class result interesting for you. Well, my name is Matias Zarlenga, as Irene mentioned it. I am PhD in sociology from the University of Barcelona. I am also has a master in art history as well as visual art education from the University of Barcelona too. Currently, I am postdoctoral researcher at CONICET in Buenos Aires and professor of the art management at the University of Desde Febrero in Buenos Aires too. I live in Barcelona during 7 years. Now I am living in Buenos Aires. And 2 years ago, I participated as postdoctoral researcher at the European project called Cultural Base. Today, this class, I would like to talk about some of the results of this project. Especially, I would like to talk about the relationship between cultural creativity and diversity in European cities. The title of my dissertation is New Frameworks, Narratives, and Policies of Cultural Creativity. During my talk, I try to respond these central questions. How urban diversity contribute to generate cultural diversity in creative processes? I will start the class with the questions, and I will finish with an agenda and roadmap for action to develop and improve a new conception of cultural creativity in urban contexts. I think educational institutions and teachers have a key role in this kind of actions. As you can see, my English is not enough good, so I prefer to read in a colloquial way my class of today. The purpose of these talks is to consider new institutional and practical framework of cultural creativity, which are also situated far from economic way of thinking. In this talk, I firstly point out the limits and negative effect of the current context of cultural creativity, dominated by the economics paradigm. Secondly, I explore new frameworks, narrative, and policy of cultural creativity beyond the economistic paradigms, highlighting challenges, future scenarios, key areas of change, and possible way forward. First of all, I would like to frame the cultural-based project to better understand the question and the development of this talk. Cultural Base is a social platform founded by the European Commission Horizon 2020 Framework Programs 2014-2015, Europe in a Changing World, Inclusive, Innovative, and Reflective Societies. We understand in this project that culture now constitutes an essential basis of today's society in a context of cultural digitalization and globalization. And we think that the culture is an essential stone in the configuration of the current society. From this background, Cultural Base aims to address the topic of heritage and European identity for a double standpoint, analytical as well public and policy perspectives, exploring the new challenges and the new potential of culture through three main axes: cultural memory, cultural identity, and cultural creativity. In this slide, you can see the main structure of the projects. So the work of the cultural base platform was conducted along three main axes, as you can see: cultural memory, cultural inclusion, and cultural creativity. And each axis is divided into two different fields according to their cross with the identity or heritage topics. As I mentioned, I will talk about the creative axis today, specifically the relationship between creativity and diversity. Another important issues about the project, about the Cultural Bay project, that I would like to mention to you is the team that include both a scientific core group for one side and another side, a practitioner and policies stakeholders. We conform an agreement between 6 different universities across Europe. University of Barcelona is one of them, European University Institute is another one, University of Sussex, University of Paris, European University, and University of Glasgow, sorry. And we also include a foundation Interas that function as a link between the academic part of the project with the stakeholders. The practitioner and policy stakeholder part of the project are a diverse group that include an umbrella of organizations and different stakeholders that interested in the cultural problems. For us, they are part of this platform where was very important. It was a key element to discuss the several parts of our project in different phases. The project ended in 2017, this year. And well, from the creativity axis, we start with the central question, as I mentioned. The central question was how cultural diversity contribute to cultural creativity. The relevance of the question for us was central. On the one hand, from the increasingly plural, contrasted, and diversified cultural condition of European societies in the globalizing world. On the other hand, because the importance of contradictory consequences of a new situation, major challenges for cohesion, and at the same time, a source of valuable opportunities. On the positive side, I think cultural diversity appears as a crucial factor favoring cultural creativity. In this respect, for clarify this positive contribution of cultural diversity and the ways for making it effective should be considered crucial issues for European society today. Here, cultural diversity in this project, in the frame of this project, is understood in terms of social actors belonging to diverse ethnic, national, or other speciality defined groups, social class groups, gender, subcultures, or generation groups, as well as in terms of cultural repertories linked to those groups. On the other side, cultural creativity is interpreted as the collective capacity for the producing, valorizing cultural expression, both at the level of professional cultural sector, cultural works, and in society as a whole, new cultural identity expressing for and lifestyles. And intrinsically, the intrinsically cultural capacity used to be associated to a more general capacity for reflexivity adaptation, and innovation in all of different aspects of social life. The relationship between cultural diversity and cultural creativity takes shapes at different levels, in different institutional contexts and social formation, and connected to different public policy and social problems. For exploring the complexity involved in this relationship, I focused on issues representing one fundamental topics on the research and policies. So I formulated another more empirical questions. How urban diversity specifically contribute to generate cultural creativity processes? Is cultural diversity actively integrated in the programs and activities of cultural institutions as auditorium, theater, schools, museum, and other cultural mediators as creative and cultural industry, arts educational institutes, or educational system? How and why is expression of cultural diversity promoted at the urban and suburban level as a source of cultural creativity? So if we analyze the current emergency of creativity concept, is related with some social, economic, and spatial transformation, which have been taking place since 80s in many European cities. This transformation have strong cultural and symbolic components. The cultural and symbolic elements are in the core of the project of urban intervention strategy in cities carried out by public and private sectors. If you can see, there are two kinds of strategy in these respects. Those aim to developing economic sectors linked to the production of cultural goods, so-called cultural creative industries, and those aim at generating cultural service to attract tourists, business by recovering the heritage that already exists in towns and cities, urban regeneration processes, or creating cultural institutions and facilities such as museums and cultural centers. Both strategies have a similar urban configuration, with characterized by the concentration of firm, institution, and cultural professionals. Currently, as a result of this change, appear numerous academics and professional researches which explain or promote these transformations using the key concept of creativity. The uses of this concept have been increasing as well as the interest of cultural institution and industry as key element of socio-economic development, urban regeneration, and social inclusion. We can distinguish at least three perspectives in this bibliography that use the creative concepts. The first of this perspective is the creative cities. This kind of perspective understands creativity as a kind of material or symbolic urban resource, which is generated by cultural facilities and cultural institutions like museums or cultural centers, so kind of events, festival for instance, any kind of festivals, or strategies of transforms urban environments. This perspective mainly comes from both private consultants related with public administration or the academic work, specified in urbanist cultural policies. The literature on creative city focuses on the positives or negative impact that this type of strategy has on urban transformations. In some cases, they also propose new toolkits or perspective to take into account when applying certain urban regeneration strategies. However, this perspective on creative cities tend to reduce the creativity processes to a particular urban infrastructure. So the cultural vitality on cities exclusively depends, from this point of view, on material resources like accessibility or technical or urban and cultural infrastructures, and some symbolic results as design of the urban landscape, architectural icons, and intensity of urban lives. Second, the literature of creative economy. This kind of perspective understood creativity as a particular good which is generated by creative industry. In general, this second line of research develops from economic geography in most of the studies, economics also, and business analysis, which seek to identify a strategy for local economy development based on the so-called cultural and creative economy. The literature of creative economy tends for us to limit the creativity concept to the processes of economic innovation. So here we see the same patterns, connect creativity with innovation. Finally, we can distinguish a group of research which understand creativity as a kind of activity carried out by artistic or creative professionals. These perspectives that centers on the analysis of the cultural professions and professionals in urban contexts and the ways of organizing work in the cultural world and how the field of art is structured. This type of analysis is carried out by social scientists, sociologists, or anthropologists. Some of this recent research into this perspective started to using the concept creative class as a framework to analyze the connection between creativity and city. This perspective on the creative class tends to ignore the social relationship through which cultural processes develop in cities. This type of analysis focuses on the idea of individual talent and its classification within the wider concepts such as the creative class. Within this context, I could identify into the study that examined the relationship between diversity and creativity in urban contexts at least 4 main issues. Those associated with the economic growth, urban regeneration, integration of migrant and urban cultural productions. The studies in economic geography were the first to pay attention to the relationship between urban diversity and creativity. From this point of view, creativity is understood as the first step of economic innovation and the economic growth of cities. This kind of a study generally understands diversity in terms of language, ethnicity, nationality, gender, and cultural difference of highlights workers. This approach paid more attention to diversity measurement techniques than focus on the type of interaction between workers. So here I could identify at least 2 main lines of thinkings in the study of this kind. On the one hand, there are studies that focus on understanding the cause of urban diversity, and other studies are those that analyze its economic effects. The first critic of this kind of approach is, again, it's their economic reductionism. In this sense, many analysts point out that diversity is understood and valued only as input for innovation, economic development, and the competition between cities. In this sense, both diversity and creativity are only discussed in the context of socio-economic interaction, leaving out others frameworks of no-economic interaction and creativity. The second kind of approach to analyze of diversity in urban contexts came from study of urban and cultural planners. This kind of analysis understands diversity as a key element that defines the vitality and dynamism of the city or a neighborhood. From this point of view, urban diversity includes social-cultural aspect of the city inhabitants, ethnic, linguistic, sexual orientation, etc. Professional careers, which include activities related to the artistic, creative, and cultural life of a city, and urban amenities, which define the cultural offering of a city: museums, gallery, cultural centers, tourist landmarks, and nightlife space, etc. In these perspectives, I could distinguish at least two lines of analysis and recommendations. On the one hand, there is a line of study that understands urban diversity as key element in the supply of cultural consumption of the city, and therefore a central factor that encourages their development and regeneration. The second line of this kind of study, very close to the economic geography perspective, understand diversity from a productive point of view. The main critics of this approach are, on the one hand, that the analysis and the recommendation promote cultural diversity from a strict economic point of view, linked to cultural consumptions. On the other hand, study of this perspective had not analyzed the cultural interaction generated in a city at all, and only focus on their results in terms of cultural production. So here we can see the same limitation that the other perspectives. A third trends perspective that inquire into the creativity and diversity in cities came from studies on migration. Traditionally, this study have worked on the impact of migration processes and mobility within the framework of inclusion policies and sociocultural cohesions. In the recent times, some intercultural study understand that the best way to achieve effective policy of interaction is through cultural creativity. The problem with this kind of a study is the lack of development. This kind of a study understands diversity as a sociocultural background, which include also national, ethnic, linguistic, religion, and social aspect of migrant population. The main aim of this approach is to avoid forced interaction among different groups in order to reframe them in the context of specific objectives linked to the creative and innovation processes. As mentioned, this approach is recent, it's very recent and has not yet been developed yet. However, it can already identify possible lines of approach and development of cultural policy aimed to promote different ways of migrant integration within the paradigm of interculturalism and creativity. A clear example of a possible line of analysis in this perspective can be related to the development of program activities that include participation of migrants in cultural institutions in order to produce and promote cultural innovation in public and cultural actors. Well, the last line that I identified in the relationship between creativity and diversity came from the anthropology and sociological studies. Traditionally, these perspectives analyze art and culture from the point of view of the rules and convention and hierarchies that govern the sphere of cultural production of certain artistic disciplines, regardless of the territorial context in which they happen. So, however, in recent times, sociology and anthropology has pointed out of the importance of territory in understanding cultural creativity processes. However, this perspective is not enough development as the previous one, and it could distinguish at least two lines, two trends in these perspectives. On the one hand, some approach to understand diversity as a key element of cross-cultural interaction in the framework of cultural creativity processes in urban contexts. On the other hand, urban diversity is analyzed from the point of view of cultural results in terms of uniqueness, cultural production related to the place. As you can see in this brief background of the state of the art of the problem that connect creativity with diversity, we can find a great importance attribute to the positive relationship between diversity and cultural creativity, both in academic study and in public intervention. We have identified study addressing the issues of diversity and cultural encounters as a specific cultural phenomenon linked to the process of hybridization in different areas of cultural creations. However, we can also find some limitations. The first of all, economic reductionism is one of these shortcomings and limitation of this kind of narratives. In this sense, creativity is only discussed in this kind of bibliography, in this kind of literature, in the context of social economic interaction, leaving out other frameworks of not economic interaction and creativity. Even so, some analysts point out that social and cultural diversity is understood and valued only as input for innovation. So they are in all these kind of literacy, there are a strong connection between creativity, diversity, and economic innovation. Another limitation is the social limitations because of the treatment of work and involved in this type of economic interaction as also reductionist. So while many scholars within the paradigm of cultural creativity understand and promote diversity from a broadest perspective, ranging from ethno-linguistic factors, national origins, vocational and sexual orientation as key element of creativity, as a key aspect to innovation and economic growth. In this kind of perspective, it tends to exclude social origin in this approach. So therefore, diversity is reduced to people with talent belonging to the so-called creative class, which means, in fact, highly qualified workers from the middle and upper middle class of society. So within this kind of hegemonic narrative, the economic narrative of understand creativity and diversity, the diversity is a resource for individual talent and not understand as social and collective processes. So the another limitation of this kind of narrative that connect creativity, diversity with economic is the territorial limitation. This kind of narrative tends to focus and promote policies almost exclusively in the urban city centers, omitting suburban and rural areas. Finally, we can find another limitations, the political limitations. So several of the cultural policy within this economic narrative of cultural creativity are focuses only in development and growing aspect of the city. So in generally, in this kind of narrative, there are another limitation relating with some kind of top-down logic to to a definition of project and to intervene in a city. So as you can see, as a sum up of this first part of the class, the studies on diversity and creativity in urban contexts in general are connected with the economic aspect of the creativity and the diversity. So if you can see the result of this kind of study and policy have been the emergence of a narrative. We can see clearly that there are a dominant narrative that connect creativity and diversity in terms of economic aspects. So we started to call this narrative as the economic narrative on creativity. And this kind of narrative connect creativity with talent, with the only proposed to the innovation in economic aspect. So the policies and the intervention promoting under this economic framework of cultural creativity have several limitations, and we wanted with this project go beyond these narratives. It suppose disconnects cultural creativity from economic and innovation narrative to help to understand and promote other social practices that connect creativity force of a society with more plural, inclusive, and democratic purpose. For us, cultural creativity could function as a key element to promote integration and inclusion among different cultures from inside and outside of Europe. So if we understand cultural creativity as an ideal space of intercultural exchange, and we interpret these processes in terms of cultural hybridization, cultural creativity would contribute to create a more diverse and inclusive Europe. In this sense, for us, there are interesting policies and best practice from which we can learn that thinks diversity and creativity beyond these economic paradigms. In this sense, we can learn from a lot of initiative, a lot of institution, and a lot of place. For instance, we ask during this project what are the policies and the best practice that have already promoted plural and inclusive cultural practice at the European level. So we firstly see that there are a lot of initiatives in this sense. The condition, for instance, for development of cultural contacts can be variable in Europe. Different traditions of citizenship have been favorable to the integration or recognition of cultural diversity in different European countries, and also to cultural hybridization processes. For instance, in the last years, after the UNESCO Convention of the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions in 2005, this trend has intensified. At the European level, the Council of Europe, for example, sometimes together with the European Commissions, has promoted important programs and recommendations for cultural diversity. And particular significant initiative in this regard was the European Year of Intercultural Dialogue in 2008, supported by the European Union. Indeed, we can find some interesting initiatives and best practices where intercultural interchange and hybridization processes are promoted through cultural creativity in the field of cultural organization and specific cultural programs. For instance, in Italian, we see an interesting initiatives related with the theater, the social theater, as the Teatro della Alve in Ravenna and Teatro Nascosto in Volterra, are good example of creativity initiative developed between the local and the global that have achieved an outstanding impact of countries' theater scenes beyond the economic narrow mind. Another good example is the Global Music Academy in Berlin. It's a private music school that works in areas with a high proportion of migrants and which develops a holistic approach to develop of music capacities. a trained musician, musicologist, producer, and cultural manager in the style and practice of different music cultures around the world. Finally, we found another good example that given by the Constance itself about the House of European History. That's it's an institution that promotes in his exhibition a diverse curatorial approach to understand the history of Europe. And secondly, we wondering what about the policy that connect cultural creativity, diversity with local or community engagement. The Agenda 21 of culture in this sense was a good example. The Agenda 21 for culture, for instance, was agreed by city and local governments from all over the world to set up their commitment to human rights, cultural diversity, and participatory democracy processes. We can also find interesting best practice on cultural creativity, connect with diversity processes permeable to the problem of the social and local environments, such as community-based art theater scenes in Netherlands, or Berlin and Copenhagen music theater experience. On the other hand, problems of the social and local setting can be faced from the creative processes as a raw material in performing as a great number of community-based organization commitment to social inclusion working with, for instance, the experience of Augusto Boll's theater of oppressive methodology. So we think they are a good best practice where we can learn. However, for us, there is not a clear cultural policy today to promote intercultural interchange or local or community engagement through cultural creativity processes. The experience and the best practices within these frameworks are gaining enough visibility in European context, so we think there are some challenges faced in promoting a plural and inclusive cultural creativity for Europe. We found at least 4 important challenges that I would like to address to you. The first one is how to identify, more than I give you, empirical examples and good practices of cultural creativity beyond the economic stick paradigms. I think identify examples and new scenarios, dynamic and good practices, less oriented to an economic stick goals and more oriented with social and cultural engagement. It would be a good starting point. Some of these artistic practices are permeable to the problems of migrant and intercultural exchange, and problem of local community as the example that mentioned it before. So the question here, I think, to ask is to inquire is how can we learn from their experience and how we can disseminate the findings. Another challenge is how to reinforce the European cosmopolitanist tradition as cultural and institutional basis favorable to promote intercultural interchange and hybridization processes through cultural creativity. I think we have current anti-cosmopolitanist trends make intercultural dialogue difficult and promote hostility and rejection instead of cultural hybridization and diversity. Racism and xenophobia pose the biggest difficulty for intercultural dialogue. However, I think Europe has a strong tradition of individual freedom, tolerance, pluralism, and democratic inclusion, giving rise to a form of cosmopolitanism. In this sense, the recognition of cultural diversity has been favorable, and intercultural dialogue has been encouraged in different ways. So here I will ask Another question is how to improve the European cosmopolitan tradition to promote intercultural interchange and hybridization processes through cultural creativity. Another challenge is how to create a common normative consensus to understand and promote cultural practices that connect the creative force of a society with both democratic purposes such as social and cultural inclusion. A new narrative on cultural creativity is necessary, I think, in order to prevent a narrow understanding of the social processes behind cultural creation. For me, disconnecting cultural creativity from innovation in economic ways help us to understand and promote other social practices that connect the creativity force of a society with more democratic purposes such as social and cultural inclusion, improve the social condition of people, seeking for better model of social participation and organization, promoting the emergence of a new and alternative forms of scientific and artistic production also, establishing more sustainable relationship with our natural, social, and cultural environments in the other things. So here I have another question. Is it possible to define a new cultural creative narrative? If it is possible, on what grounds should this be passed? How can the roles of creator, mediator, teacher, professor in the concept of such a new paradigm of creativity? Finally, the four challenges. How to elaborate new cultural and public policies of cultural creativity oriented towards promoting intercultural interchange and community engagement. On the one hand, I think one of the main problems that potential new policy on cultural creativity could face the issues of periodicity and source of finance. For instance, public grants and subsidies are mostly goal-oriented in a short-term lapse, hindering creative processes and proposals that go beyond annual budget cycles. On the other hand, I think bottom-up transnational processes from the civil society of cultural creativity are not widespread, generating, in some cases, isolations and hindrance to permanence. So here I have another question for you. Is it possible to define new public and cultural policy that encourage cultural creativity in terms of cultural interchange and community and local engagement? What guidelines and objectives should be followed? What examples of existing policies should be considered as reference? And to conclude, I would like to highlight some relevant action points to reach this goal. I think that we could define priority areas for action and topics on which to concentrate these objectives. Second, I think we can seek and highlight relevant opportunities at the local level to develop a mapping of local examples and good practices on cultural creativity from a plural and inclusive point of view. Third, I think we can promote initiatives and debates or create some models or prototypes that are relevant to measure cultural creativity oriented towards social engagement, intercultural interchange, and inclusions at the European level beyond these economic tools that only measure in terms of the positive impact related with innovation. And finally, make use this knowledge to improve synergy between public, private, and community areas. Yes, so I can clarify some aspect because I try to understand the connection between diversity, creativity, and city, and I found that all the focus are put into how this aspect connect with innovation in terms of economic and and we try to imagine and develop another lines of action that connect creativity and diversity with other proposes, more connected with social inclusion, and try to rethink creativity in another frame. So because of this the title of the talks is now New Framework of Cultural Creativity. I think it's very, very important. When I was working on the project, I found interesting initiatives related with the educational programs that promote the inclusion in terms of migrants. So they use the art as main tool to develop projects that connect the art with creativity and with inclusions proposed. A lot of orchestra works very well in these aspects, and a lot of experience of theater that you can find as connect diversity, creativity, and education with this uh, perspective of social inclusion. So I think the experience with students at the schools are very interesting. There are a lot of interesting experience that connect this kind of aspect of creativity with diversity and with inclusion, and I think we can learn a lot of about this different experience in the school at this level. But I think the problem is the lack of connection of between this among this all of this experience. When I try to looking for interacting experience at educational level, I found isolate cases which are not connected each other, so difficult the learning from each other. So I think one of the purpose of this social platform cultural base is to connect, to create a network of experience that allow to reflect on cultural creativity, diversity with social uh, engagement. Well, we discussed a lot about this because the majority of the device related with the measure of cultural creativity is related with economic aspect. I think the first step to do that is reframe the theoretical and conceptual aspect of creativity. Connect this. This is the first step to create a device to allow us measure the creativity processes beyond this reductionist economic point of view. So we have to define, we have to generate another framework of theoretical framework of cultural creativity. And I think we can start it to use a more qualitative approach. And maybe, can you hear me? Yes? Yes, because I think, yes, um, that show the importance of creativity and diverse in terms of inclusion. And it's hard to develop a device that measure that kind of things because it's qualitative and not quantitative measure. But I think if we reframe the concept of creativity, the concept of diversity, and connect it with this proposal, is a good first step to develop more specific device to measure the quality aspect of the creativity in terms of social inclusion and cultural interchange also. Thank you, Irene, and thank you all for your comments and for the attention. Thank you for the invitation. I hope it will be useful for you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for my pronunciation. I hope it's find this class interesting for you.